Every parent's worst nightmare is losing a child. Every person's deepest fear is dying completely alone. On a frozen Chicago bridge, these two terrible terrors collide in a moment that will forever change two precious lives. Marcus Washington built a real empire from nothing, rising from the projects to become one of the city's most successful real estate moguls. But all his wealth couldn't save his own family when tragedy struck. Now, spotting a desperate pregnant woman teetering on the edge of that same bridge where he once contemplated his own end, Marcus faces a choice that will either redeem his past or destroy what's left of his soul. But what if saving her means confronting the very demons that have haunted him for years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The gold wedding band on Marcus Washington's finger caught the dashboard light as he gripped the steering wheel of his Mercedes, fighting the urge to pull it off and throw it into the Chicago River below. 3 years had passed since the accident, yet he still wore it like a penitent wears chains, a daily reminder of the family he'd failed to protect. At 45, Marcus had everything the American dream promised a black man could achieve if he worked hard enough, stayed out of trouble, and kept his eyes on the prize. His real estate empire stretched across Chicago's South Side, transforming abandoned lots into thriving communities. Forbes had featured him on their cover last year, calling him the resurrection king of urban development. His penthouse office overlooked the very projects where he'd grown up, where his grandmother had raised him after his mother overdosed when he was 12. From the bottom to the top, the magazines always wrote, Marcus Washington proves that in America, anything is possible. But they didn't know about the empty mansion in Lincoln Park that he returned to each night, walking through rooms that echoed with the ghosts of conversations never had. They didn't know about the nursery he'd spent 6 months preparing, painting. The walls a soft yellow because he and Diane had wanted to be surprised. They didn't know about the tiny clothes still hanging in the closet, the crib still assembled, the mobile still turning silently in the corner whenever the heat kicked on. The accident had taken everything that mattered in one moment of twisted metal and shattered glass. A drunk driver running a red light on a Tuesday afternoon. Diane had been 8 months pregnant. The doctors said the baby, their son, might have survived if they'd gotten there 10 minutes sooner. 10 minutes. Marcus had been in a meeting, negotiating a deal that would make him another $2 million. $2 million he would have gladly burned if it could have bought him those 10 minutes. Now he drove the city streets at night, like a ghost haunting his own life. Tonight, the December cold had turned the Chicago River into something resembling liquid steel, and the bridge ahead gleamed under the streetlights like a frozen tear. This was the same bridge where he'd stood 6 months after the funeral, seriously considering whether the pain was worth carrying anymore. He'd stood there for 2 hours that night, thinking about how easy it would be to step off the edge, to finally stop pretending that success could fill the hole where his heart used to be. But Diane's voice had echoed in his memory. Her laugh, the way she used to tease him about his stubbornness, how she'd made him promise to be a good father even before they'd tried for children. You're going to be the kind of daddy who teaches his kids that love is stronger than any pain, she'd said. Promise me that, Marcus. Promise me you'll choose love. He'd stepped back from the edge that night, but he'd never really stepped away from the pain. The traffic light ahead turned red, and Marcus slowed the Mercedes to a stop, his breath fogging in the cold air despite the car's heating system. That's when he saw her, a figure on the pedestrian walkway of the bridge, standing too close to the railing, her body language screaming desperation even from a distance. Marcus had seen enough despair in his lifetime to recognize it in others. The way she gripped the metal barrier, the way her shoulders shook, not from the cold, but from something much deeper. She was young, maybe early 20s, with dark hair whipping in the wind. Even from his car, he could see she was pregnant, her belly visible beneath her thin coat, Time slowed as Marcus watched her climb over the first barrier, her movements deliberate but shaking. She was maybe 8 feet above the icy water, but the current below was swift and merciless. No one survived that river in December. Not at night. Not alone. The light turned green, but Marcus didn't move. Cars began honking behind him there. Drivers impatient to get home, to warm houses and loving families. Things he'd once taken for granted. The woman on the bridge shifted her weight, leaning forward, and Marcus felt something in his chest crack open like ice, breaking under pressure. He yanked the car to the side of the road and was out the door before he'd fully processed the decision. His expensive Italian shoes slipped on the icy pavement as he ran toward the bridge, his breath coming in sharp puffs in the bitter air. Behind him, someone shouted for him to move his car. In front of him, the woman's life balanced on a moment's hesitation. "Hey!" Marcus called out as he reached the walkway, keeping his voice gentle despite the urgency clawing at his throat. "Hey there, miss." She turned toward his voice, and Marcus felt his heart shatter all over again. She was beautiful despite the tear. Tracks frozen on her cheeks, despite the desperation etched into every line of her face. Her eyes held the same emptiness he saw in his own mirror each morning. The look of someone who'd lost everything that mattered. "Don't come any closer," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Please." Marcus stopped about 10 feet away, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." She looked back at the water below, and Marcus saw her knuckles whiten as she gripped the railing tighter. "I can't do this anymore." "Can't do what? Any of it? I can't be alone anymore. I can't raise a baby by myself. I can't keep pretending that everything's going to be okay when I know it's not." Her words came out in broken pieces, like glass, falling from a great height. "Everyone leaves. Everyone always leaves." Marcus felt recognition hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just about being pregnant and alone. This was about the kind of abandonment that carved holes in your soul. The kind of betrayal that made you question whether love was real or just another lie adults told to get through the day. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, as if giving her name might create some kind of obligation she wasn't ready for. "Sarah." "Sarah. I'm Marcus." He took a half-step closer, and she tensed but didn't tell him to stop. "I know. We don't know each other, but I need you to hear something, okay? You're not as alone as you think you are." Sarah laughed, a sound so bitter it could have cut glass. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're scared. I know someone hurt you so badly that dying seems easier than living. I know you're standing on that ledge because you think your baby deserves better than what you can give him." Marcus's voice grew quieter with each word. "I know because I've stood on this same bridge, looking at that same water, wondering if the pain would stop, if I just let go." For the first time since he'd called out to her, Sarah really looked at him. Her eyes swept over his expensive coat, his carefully maintained appearance, the success that radiated from every carefully chosen detail of his presentation to the world. "You?" The skepticism in her voice was obvious. "What could you possibly have to be desperate about?" Marcus reached into his coat and slowly pulled out his wallet, careful not to make any sudden movements. From it, he withdrew a photo, creased from handling, worn from being carried everywhere for 3 years. He held it up so she could see. A beautiful black woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile, her hand resting on a very pregnant belly while Marcus stood behind her, his arms wrapped around them both, his face glowing with anticipation and love. "Her name was Diane," he said, his voice steady, despite the way his heart was breaking all over again. "We'd been trying for a baby for 5 years. When we finally got pregnant, we thought we had the whole world figured out. We painted the nursery. We picked out names. We made plans." He paused, looking at the photo himself before meeting Sarah's eyes again. "They died in a car accident 3 years ago. She was 8 months pregnant." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind off the river and the distant hum of traffic. Sarah's grip on the railing loosened slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be sorry. Be alive." Marcus took another step closer. "Because right now you're carrying something precious, and I'm standing here telling you that someone cares what happens to you and that baby. Someone understands that the world looks impossible from where you're standing, but impossible and real are two different things." Sarah's shoulders began to shake, and Marcus realized she was crying, really crying. Not the frozen tears he'd seen before, but the kind of sobs that come from someplace deep and necessary. "He left me," she said through the tears. "When I told him about the baby, he just left, packed his stuff and moved out while I was at work. Left a note saying he wasn't ready to be a father." Her words came faster now, like pressure escaping from a broken dam. "I lost my job because I kept getting sick, couldn't pay the rent, got evicted yesterday. I don't have anywhere to go, I don't have anyone." "You have me," Marcus said, and the words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. "I know. That doesn't mean much right now, but it's something. It's a start." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to determine whether he was real or just another cruel trick her life was playing on her. Finally, slowly, she climbed back over the barrier to the safe side of the bridge. Marcus didn't move until she was fully on the walkway, afraid that any sudden motion might spook her back toward the edge. When her feet were planted on solid concrete, he allowed himself to breathe again. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice small and uncertain. Marcus looked at her, this young woman who'd been ready to die rather than face another day alone, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Now we get you somewhere warm," he said, "and then we figure out the rest together." The warmth from Marcus's Mercedes felt like heaven against Sarah's frozen skin, but she couldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just the cold anymore. It was the aftermath of standing so close to death that she could taste it in the wind, the terrifying relief of stepping back from that edge, and the overwhelming reality that she'd just trusted a complete stranger with her life. Marcus had given her his coat without being asked, and now he sat in his shirt sleeves, adjusting the heat to full blast while she wrapped herself in expensive wool that smelled like his cologne, something warm and earthy that spoke of confidence and success. Everything about him radiated stability, from his carefully maintained appearance to the way he moved with quiet purpose. She'd noticed his hands on the steering wheel, strong, steady, with calluses that suggested he'd worked for everything he had, despite the obvious wealth. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from crying and cold. "Hotel first. Get you warm, get some food in you." Marcus glanced at her profile, noting the way she clutched something in her left hand. "When's the last time you ate?" Sarah had to think about it, which was answer enough. "Yesterday morning, maybe. I had some crackers." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. "And before that, I don't know. Everything's been blurry lately." He pulled into the parking lot of a Hampton Inn, choosing it deliberately over the more luxurious options downtown. Sarah seemed skittish enough without him overwhelming her with too much opulence too quickly. As he parked, she finally opened her left hand, revealing a crumpled piece of paper that she'd been holding so tightly her knuckles were white. "Can I see?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah hesitated, then slowly unfolded the paper. It was an ultrasound image, grainy and black and white, but Marcus could make out the unmistakable profile of a baby. The edges were worn from handling, and there were tear stains marking the medical text at the bottom. 22 weeks. Sarah whispered, tracing the outline of the baby's head with one finger. "Due in March. It's a girl." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a pain so sharp it took his breath away, followed by something he hadn't felt in 3 years, protective tenderness toward new life. "She's beautiful. You can't even tell what she looks like. Trust me, I can tell." He looked at Sarah's profile, noting the way her hand instinctively moved to her belly. "What were you going to name her?" "Hope." The name came out as barely a whisper. "I was going to name her Hope." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. that Sarah had been ready to die while carrying a baby she'd named Hope, that she'd stood on the edge of that bridge holding an ultrasound picture like a talisman against despair. Inside the hotel lobby, Marcus handled the check-in with quiet efficiency, while Sarah stood near the fireplace, absorbing warmth and trying to make sense of what was happening. The desk clerk clearly recognized Marcus. His picture had been in the Tribune business section just last month, but had the professionalism not to make a scene. Marcus requested adjoining rooms, handed over his credit card without question, and guided Sarah toward the elevators with a gentle hand on her elbow. "You don't have to do this," Sarah said as they rode up to the 4th floor. "I mean, thank you, but I don't understand why you're helping me." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the floor numbers tick by. "Maybe I need to help you as much as you need help." Sarah's room was clean and warm, with a view of the city lights that looked like scattered stars. Marcus ordered room service, soup, sandwiches, fruit, the kind of simple food that would be gentle on a stomach that hadn't seen regular meals. While they waited for the food, he sat in the chair by the window while Sarah perched on the edge of the bed, still wearing his coat. "Tell me about him," Marcus said. "The father." Sarah's face hardened. "Tony. We'd been together for 2 years. I thought—" She shook her head. "It doesn't matter what I thought. It matters to me. I thought he loved me. I thought we were building something together. He talked about marriage, about having kids someday. When I got pregnant, I was scared but also happy. I thought he'd be happy too." Her voice grew bitter. "Instead, he packed his things and left a note on the kitchen counter. Said he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. Said he was too young to be tied down." "How old is he?" 28. Marcus made a sound of disgust. "And you?" 24. Sarah pulled the coat tighter around herself. "My mom died when I was 16. Dad left when I was 12. I don't have siblings, and my grandparents passed away in college. Tony was pretty much all I had." The depth of her isolation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd grown up poor, but he'd had his grandmother's love, had built relationships in business, had created a life filled with people who respected and valued him. Sarah had been utterly alone long before she'd climbed onto that bridge. "What about work?" he asked. "I was a dental hygienist, good job, decent pay, but the morning sickness was brutal. I kept having to leave early or call in sick. My boss was understanding at first, but—" She shrugged. "There's only so much understanding an employer can offer when you're not showing up. Did you apply for unemployment, food stamps, any kind of assistance?" Sarah's cheeks flushed. "I tried. The paperwork was overwhelming, and I kept missing appointments because I was sick. And honestly, I kept thinking Tony would come back. I kept thinking he'd realize he was making a mistake and come home, and then everything would be okay." Marcus understood that kind of hope, the dangerous kind that kept you from making practical decisions because you were waiting for a miracle that wasn't coming. He'd done the same thing after Diane died, turning down social invitations and business opportunities because some part of him believed that if he just stayed busy enough, worked hard enough, the universe might realize its mistake and give them back to him. Room service arrived, and Marcus insisted Sarah eat before they talked anymore. She was clearly starving, attacking the soup and sandwiches with the desperation of someone whose body was running on empty. While she ate, he made phone calls, quiet conversations conducted in the hallway where she couldn't hear, arranging things that would need to be arranged. When he returned, Sarah had finished eating and was lying on her side on the bed, one hand resting on her belly. For the first time since he'd seen her on the bridge, she looked peaceful. "Better?" he asked. "Much, thank you." She studied his face. "You've been making arrangements, haven't you?" "I can tell." Marcus sat back down in the chair. "Doctor's appointment tomorrow morning. You need prenatal care and you need it immediately. After that, we'll figure out the rest. I don't have insurance. I can't pay." "Don't worry about money. Just worry about taking care of yourself and Hope." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. "Why are you doing this? Really? You don't know me. For all you know, I could be lying about everything. Marcus pulled out his wallet again and showed her the photo of Diane. When she died, I thought my life was over. I thought the only reason I existed was to love her and raise our son. And when they were gone, I didn't see the point in anything else. I kept working because work was all I knew how to do. But inside I was dead. I was walking around like a ghost, going through the motions of being alive without actually living. He paused, looking out at the city lights. Standing on that bridge tonight, watching you hold Hope's ultrasound picture, I realized something. Maybe the reason I survived my darkest moment was so I could be here for yours. Maybe everything I went through taught me exactly what you need to hear right now, which is that you're not alone anymore, that Hope doesn't have to grow up without love just because her father couldn't handle responsibility, that sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about choice and commitment and showing up when someone needs you most. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks. I'm scared. Of course you are. You'd be crazy not to be scared. But fear doesn't mean hopeless. Fear just means you care enough about what happens next to want to get it right. Marcus stood up, heading toward the door that connected their rooms. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to build a life worth living. As he reached the door, Sarah's voice stopped him. Marcus, what if I'm not strong enough for this? He turned back to look at her. This young woman who'd been ready to die rather than face another day alone, who'd stood on a frozen bridge choosing death over the unknown challenges of single motherhood, who'd somehow found the courage to step back from that edge and trust a stranger with her future. Sarah, you've already proven you're stronger than you know. The hard part isn't ahead of you, it's behind you. Everything from here on out is just details. He closed the connecting door softly, leaving Sarah alone with Hope for the first time in months. The eviction notice was crumpled and stained with coffee, but the legal language was unmistakable. Sarah Miller had 72 hours to vacate the premises or face forcible removal by the sheriff's department. The notice was dated 5 days ago, which meant she'd been living on borrowed time even before Marcus found her on the bridge. Sarah sat across from him in the hotel restaurant the next morning, picking at scrambled eggs while he studied the papers. She'd finally agreed to show him. The doctor's appointment had gone better than expected. Hope was healthy and developing normally, despite Sarah's poor nutrition over the past few weeks. But the practical realities of her situation were more complicated than Marcus had initially understood. "This is your apartment?" Marcus asked, noting the address on the eviction notice. "Was my apartment. Tony's name wasn't on the lease. He always said he needed to keep his options open." Sarah's voice carried the bitter edge of someone who'd learned too late that words like commitment and future could mean very different things to different people. "When he left, I couldn't make the rent on my own. I tried to get a roommate, but who wants to live with a pregnant woman who can't promise she'll be able to pay her share?" Marcus folded the papers carefully, his business mind already calculating solutions, while his heart ached for the systematic abandonment this young woman had endured. "What about your belongings? Whatever's still there?" "I've been sleeping in my car for the past few nights, but it died yesterday morning. That's why." "I was walking when..." She gestured vaguely toward the window, unable to finish the sentence about the bridge. "We need to get your things," Marcus said decisively. "Today, before they change the locks." Sarah shook her head. "I can't face going back there. Besides, there's nothing worth saving. Just clothes and some furniture I got from Goodwill. Tony took anything valuable when he left." "It's your life," Marcus said gently. "Those clothes, those pieces of furniture, they're pieces of who you are. And more importantly, there might be things for Hope. Baby clothes, books, anything you'd started preparing for her." The mention of baby preparations made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. "I had a crib. Not new, but I'd painted it white and bought new bedding. And a rocking chair that I found at a thrift store. I spent weeks refinishing it." Her voice grew quieter. "It was going to be perfect. I had this whole vision of sitting in that chair, holding her, singing to her." Marcus felt the familiar ache. In his chest, the pain of dreams interrupted, of futures that existed only in the imagination now. Then we're definitely getting that rocking chair. An hour later, they stood outside a rundown apartment complex on Chicago's west side, the kind of building where dreams came to die slowly, one missed rent payment at a time. Sarah's hands shook as she used her key one last time, and Marcus had to resist the urge to take her hand in his. They were still strangers, really, bound together by one moment of crisis and a mutual understanding of loss, but he was already feeling protective in a way that surprised him. The apartment was smaller than Marcus had expected, a one-bedroom with thin walls and windows that didn't quite close properly. But Sarah had tried to make it home. There were hand-painted pictures on the walls, plants on the windowsills, and a cozy reading nook by the window where she'd clearly spent peaceful hours. The eviction notice hadn't stopped her from keeping the space clean and organized, which told Marcus something important about her character. "The nursery's in the bedroom," Sarah said quietly, heading down a short hallway. Marcus followed her into a space that made his breath catch. The nursery was tiny but perfect, every detail chosen with love and careful consideration. The crib Sarah had mentioned sat against one wall, painted white with delicate yellow flowers, hand-painted on the headboard. The rocking chair occupied the corner by the window, its dark wood gleaming from careful refinishing, with a soft yellow cushion and a small pillow embroidered with the word hope. But it was the mobile hanging over the crib that nearly brought Marcus to his knees. Tiny fabric butterflies in shades of yellow, pink and green hung from delicate wire, designed to catch the light and cast dancing shadows on the ceiling. It was exactly like the mobile he and Diane had chosen for their son's nursery. The same style, the same gentle movement, the same promise of wonder and beauty for a child who might never see it. "Oh, Sarah," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She misunderstood his reaction. "I know it's not much. I know other people have fancy nurseries with expensive everything, but I tried to make it special." "It's perfect," Marcus interrupted, his voice firm. "It's absolutely perfect. Any little girl would be lucky to grow up in a room like this." Sarah looked at him with surprise, then followed his gaze to the mobile. "You really think so?" "I know so." Marcus walked to the crib and gently touched one of the butterflies, setting the whole mobile into gentle motion. "This is love, Sarah. This is what love looks like when it's translated into action. Hope is going to grow up knowing she was wanted, knowing she was planned for, knowing her mother cared enough to make something beautiful just for her." They worked in companionable silence for the next 2 hours, packing Sarah's belongings into boxes Marcus had brought from the hotel. Her clothes fit in 2 suitcases, her books in 3 boxes, her kitchen items in another. The nursery items were packed with extra care, the mobile wrapped in tissue paper, the crib disassembled with all the hardware carefully labeled, the rocking chair cushions protected in plastic bags. Marcus had arranged for a moving truck, despite Sarah's protests. "About the expense. You're not paying me back," he'd said when she tried to argue. "This isn't a loan, it's a gift. Sometimes people help other people because they can, not because they expect anything in return." As they worked, Sarah told him more about her plans before Tony left. She'd been taking online classes to become a certified lactation consultant, hoping to build a career that would allow her to work with new mothers and babies. She'd saved money for maternity leave, researched daycare options, even picked out pediatricians. She'd had a plan, a future, a vision of what her life with hope would look like. "I felt like such a failure when everything fell apart," Sarah admitted as they loaded the last box. "Like maybe I wasn't meant to be a mother, like maybe Hope would be better off without me." Marcus stopped what he was doing and looked at her directly. "Sarah, I've seen how you prepared for this baby. I've seen the love you put into that nursery, the care you took choosing every detail. Hope isn't going to care if she's born into a mansion or a studio apartment. She's going to care that her mother loves her enough to choose life, even when life gets impossibly hard." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What happens now? I mean, I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I can't live in a hotel room forever. I can't keep taking charity. It's not charity, Marcus said firmly. And you're not taking, you're receiving. There's a difference. He closed the truck's back door and handed the keys to the driver. As for what happens now, I have an idea. But first, I want to show you something. Sarah climbed into the passenger seat of his Mercedes, curiosity replacing the resignation that had marked her expression for most of the morning. As Marcus drove through the city, heading toward Lincoln Park, she noticed him fidgeting with something, twisting a gold band on his left ring finger, a gesture that seemed unconscious but loaded with meaning. "Are you married?" she asked quietly. Marcus glanced at the ring as if surprised to find it still there. My wife died 3 years ago, but you still wear the ring." "I guess I've never been ready to take it off. It felt like giving up on something I wasn't ready to give up on." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of symbols, the power of small objects to hold enormous meaning. She thought of Hope's ultrasound picture, still folded in her purse, still creased from being held too tightly on the bridge. "Maybe," she said carefully, "some things we hold on to because we need them, and some things we hold on to because we're afraid to let go. Maybe the trick is figuring out which is which." Marcus looked at her with something like surprise, recognizing wisdom in someone so young, seeing strength in someone who'd seemed so fragile just 24 hours ago. "Maybe you're right," he said, and for the first time in 3 years, he stopped twisting the ring. Marcus Washington's mansion in Lincoln Park was the kind of house that appeared in architecture magazines, 3 stories of restored Victorian elegance with modern touches that spoke of both money and taste. But as Sarah followed him through the front door, what struck her most wasn't the obvious wealth or the carefully curated furnishings. It was the silence. The house felt like a museum of a life that had stopped mid-sentence. Fresh flowers sat in crystal vases, but they were the kind delivered by a service, perfectly arranged, but lacking the casual imperfection of flowers chosen with love. The kitchen was immaculate but looked unused, as if Marcus survived on takeout. And hotel restaurants, rather than cooking in the space he'd probably designed for family dinners. Everything was beautiful, but nothing looked lived in. "It's incredible," Sarah said, running her hand along the smooth marble countertop in the kitchen. "But it's so quiet." Marcus followed her gaze around the empty rooms, seeing them perhaps for the first time through someone else's eyes. "I don't entertain much anymore. Don't really see the point." Sarah was about to respond when she noticed something that made her breath catch. A baby gate still installed at the bottom of the staircase, its safety latch polished but unused. Above it, the stairs climbed toward what she suddenly understood was forbidden territory. "Marcus," she said softly, "is the nursery still—" He cut her off with a sharp nod, his jaw tightening. "Upstairs. Last door on the left. I haven't changed anything." The admission hung between them like a confession. Sarah understood, with the intuitive knowledge of someone who'd also lived with loss, that Marcus had preserved that room as a shrine to possibilities that would never become reality. She thought of her own small nursery, now packed in boxes in a storage unit, and felt a kinship with this man who couldn't let go of dreams any more than she could. "Can I see it?" she asked. Marcus's hand went instinctively to his wedding ring, twisting it as he considered her request. No one had been in that room except him since the day he'd finished painting it. His housekeeper had strict instructions to dust around the door, but never enter. His business partner, David, had suggested several times that he convert it to an office, but Marcus had shut down those conversations before they could begin. "Why?" Marcus asked, not unkindly, but with genuine curiosity. "Because I think we both need to," Sarah said simply. They climbed the stairs together, Marcus's hand trailing along the banister as if he needed the physical support. The baby gate unlatched with a soft click, and Sarah noticed how his fingers moved automatically to the mechanism, muscle memory from a routine he'd never gotten to establish. The nursery door was painted a soft cream color with a small wooden sign that read, "Baby Washington, due September 15th," in elegant script. Marcus's hand hesitated on the doorknob, and Sarah gently placed her fingers over his. "Together?" she said. The room was breathtaking in its completeness and heartbreaking in its emptiness. Unlike Sarah's modest but loving nursery, this space had been created with unlimited resources and unlimited love. The crib was a work of art, dark, cherry wood with intricate carvings, bedding in soft yellows and greens, a mobile of hand-carved wooden animals that would have cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Built-in bookshelves lined one wall, already filled with picture books and children's classics. A leather rocking chair sat by the window, positioned to catch the morning light, with a side table holding a baby monitor, a lamp, and a framed ultrasound photo. But it was the boxes in the corner that broke Sarah's heart. Carefully labeled storage. Containers, 0 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months. A lifetime of tiny clothes organized by size, waiting for a child who would never wear them. "Oh, Marcus," Sarah whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her belly, where hope was growing. Marcus stood in the doorway, unable to fully enter the room. Diane loved to shop for baby clothes. She'd come home with tiny outfits and hold them up, trying to imagine what he'd look like wearing them. She bought clothes for his first birthday, his first Christmas, his first day of school. His voice grew thick. She said she wanted him to have everything, to never want for anything. Sarah walked slowly around the room, taking in every detail. The nightlight shaped like a moon, the growth chart already mounted on the wall, the changing table stocked with supplies that had expired years ago. She stopped in front of one of the storage boxes and, with a glance at Marcus for permission, carefully lifted the lid. Inside were the tiniest clothes she'd ever seen, each one chosen with love and care. Onesies in soft pastels, miniature socks, no bigger than her thumb, sleepers with feet built in. She lifted a yellow outfit, perfect for a baby whose gender would be a surprise, and held it against the light streaming through the window. "These could fit Hope," she said quietly. Marcus finally stepped fully into the room, moving towards Sarah as if drawn by an invisible force. Diane always said yellow was the color of possibility, said it didn't matter if the baby was a boy or a girl. Yellow meant hope and sunshine and new beginnings. Sarah carefully folded the tiny outfit and placed it back in the box, but not before Marcus saw the tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know this must be hard for you." "It is hard," Marcus admitted, "but not the way I expected. I thought coming in here with someone else would feel like betrayal. Instead, it feels like—" He paused, searching for words. Like maybe Diane would want these things to be used. Like maybe holding on to them just to hold on to them isn't the same as honoring her memory. Sarah looked at him with understanding. She wanted to be a mother more than anything. Then maybe the best way to honor that is to help someone else become one. They stood in silence for several minutes, both lost in thought. Finally, Marcus walked to the rocking chair and sat down, his large frame looking incongruous in the piece. Of furniture designed for intimate moments with a tiny baby. "After the accident, I used to come in here sometimes," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'd sit in this chair and try to imagine what it would have been like. Holding him, feeding him, singing to him. Diane had already picked out lullabies she wanted to teach him." He looked up at Sarah. "Do you know any lullabies?" Sarah sat on the floor near the chair, her growing belly making a more elegant position impossible. "My grandmother used to sing to me. I remember bits and pieces, but not everything. Diane's favorite was 'You Are My Sunshine.' She said she was going to sing it to him every night before bed, so he'd always know how much light he brought into our world." Without thinking, Sarah began to hum the melody, her voice soft and uncertain at first, then growing stronger as the words came back to her. Marcus closed his eyes and listened, and for a moment the room felt alive with possibility instead of loss. "Hope's going to be so lucky," Marcus said when Sarah finished. "She's going to have a mother who sings to her, who chose life for her, even when life seemed impossible." Sarah wiped her eyes and looked around the perfect nursery one more time. "Marcus, what if these things could help another baby? What if Hope could use some of these clothes, and you could know that Diane's love was still making a difference in the world?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, his hand absently stroking the arm of the rocking chair. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but emotional. "I think Diane would like that. I think she'd want her preparations to matter, even if they didn't matter. The way we planned." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where he'd built his empire but lost his heart. "Sarah, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. If I offered you a place to stay while you get back on your feet, would you accept? Not charity," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "A partnership. You help me figure out what to do with all this." He gestured around the nursery. "And I help you prepare for Hope. We both get what we need." Sarah looked at this man who'd saved her life less than 24 hours ago, who'd already given her more kindness than she'd received in months, who was now offering her a lifeline she hadn't dared to imagine. "Are you sure?" she asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since she'd met him, a real smile that transformed his entire face and made him look years younger. "I'm sure. Besides, this house needs laughter. It needs life. It needs someone who understands that. Love doesn't end just because circumstances change." Sarah struggled to her feet and walked to where Marcus stood by the window. Together, they looked out at the city sprawling before them, full of possibilities neither of them had been able to imagine just that morning. "Okay," Sarah said simply. "Yes, thank you." As if to punctuate the moment, Hope chose that instant to kick, a strong flutter that made Sarah gasp and place her hand on her belly. Without thinking, Marcus reached out and placed his hand next to hers, and for one perfect moment they both felt the promise of new life asserting itself in a room that had been silent too long. "Hello, Hope," Marcus whispered. "Welcome to the family." The legal documents arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who apologized for the early hour as he handed Sarah the thick manila envelope. She was in Marcus's kitchen making tea and humming softly to Hope, who'd been particularly active that morning. 3 weeks had passed since she'd moved into the Lincoln Park mansion. 3 weeks of doctor's appointments, prenatal vitamins, and the gradual restoration of her health and hope. Marcus had been nothing but respectful, giving her the entire guest wing of the house and making sure she felt like a welcome partner rather than a charity case. They'd developed an easy routine. Breakfast together before Marcus left for work, dinner when he returned, and quiet evenings spent planning for Hope's arrival. Sarah had even started helping him sort through Diane's things, a process that seemed to bring him peace rather than pain. But the envelope in Sarah's hands changed everything. Her name was typed across the front in legal precision. Sarah Elizabeth Miller. The return address was from Hutchins and Associates Family Law. With shaking hands, she tore open the seal and pulled out the papers inside. Petition for paternity and custody rights, the top document read. Anthony James Morrison versus Sarah Elizabeth Miller, regarding the minor child to be born approximately March 15th. Sarah's knees went weak, and she had to grab the kitchen counter to steady herself. Tony was suing her. After abandoning her, after leaving her homeless and desperate, after driving her to the edge of suicide, he was now claiming legal rights. To Hope, she forced herself to read further, though the legal language made her head spin. Tony was claiming that despite their relationship ending, he had parental rights that entitled him to joint custody, decision-making authority, and regular visitation. He was requesting DNA testing upon the child's birth and asking the court to appoint a guardian ad litem to represent the baby's interests during the proceedings. But it was the final page that made Sarah's blood turn cold. Tony was also requesting that Sarah be prohibited from making any major decisions about the pregnancy or the child without his consent, including where she lived during the pregnancy and who she associated with. The papers specifically mentioned concerns about the minor child's welfare, given the mother's recent instability and questionable living arrangements with unrelated individuals. Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, the papers scattered around her, and began to cry. Not the gentle tears of relief she'd shed over the past few weeks, but the hard, desperate sobs of someone whose world was crumbling again, just as she'd begun to believe in stability. Marcus found her that way when he came downstairs for coffee. Before work, he was already dressed in one of his perfectly tailored suits, but seeing Sarah's distress, he immediately loosened his tie and sat beside her. "What happened?" he asked gently, gathering the papers from where they'd fallen. Sarah couldn't speak at first, could only point at the documents while her shoulders shook. Marcus read through them quickly, his expression growing darker with each page. "Son of a bitch," he muttered, then caught himself. "Sorry, but Sarah, this is unconscionable." "He left me," Sarah managed to say through her tears. "He walked out when I told him I was pregnant. I almost died because of him, and now he wants to take hope away from me." Marcus stood up and began pacing the kitchen, the papers clutched in his hand. "This isn't about wanting the baby. This is about control and money." "What do you mean? Think about it. You're living in a mansion in Lincoln Park now. You're getting proper medical care, eating well, preparing for this baby in comfort and security. Tony sees that, and suddenly he wants to be a father." Marcus shook his head. He's not interested in parenting. He's interested in whatever financial advantage he thinks he can get from this situation. Sarah felt a new wave of panic wash over her. Can he do this? Can he really take her away from me? Not if I have anything to say about it. Marcus sat back down and took Sarah's hands in his. "Sarah, listen to me. You're not alone anymore. You have resources now, and you have people who care about you. We're going to fight this. I can't afford a lawyer. Not the kind of lawyer who could go up against whatever firm he's hired. You don't need to afford a lawyer. I'm calling David Stern. He's the best family law attorney in Chicago, and he owes me several favors." Marcus was already reaching for his phone. "But first, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Sarah wiped her eyes with the tissue Marcus offered. "Okay. Is there any possibility, any at all, that Tony isn't Hope's father?" The question hung in the air like a live wire. Sarah's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, indignation, and then something that looked almost like guilt. "Sarah? No," she said quickly. "I mean, yes, Tony is the father, of course he is. We were together for 2 years. But Marcus had built a business empire by reading people, by recognizing when someone wasn't telling the complete truth." Something in Sarah's tone, in the way she looked away when she answered, made him press further. "But there's something else, something you haven't told me." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her hands instinctively moving to her belly, where hope was growing. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "There was someone else. Before Tony and I got back together the last time, we'd broken up for about 6 weeks, and I met someone." She looked up at Marcus with tears in her eyes. "It was stupid. I was hurt and angry, and this guy was kind to me. It only happened twice, but the timing—" "Does Tony know about this?" "No. No one knows. And I'm sure Hope is his. I mean, I'm 90% sure." Sarah's voice cracked. "Oh God, what if she isn't? What if he finds out and uses it against me?" Marcus was quiet, processing this new information. Who was the other man? "His name is James Rodriguez. He's a teacher at the elementary school where I used to volunteer. He's married now, has kids of his own. I can't drag him into this." Marcus understood the full complexity of the situation now. If Tony demanded a paternity test, which the court would likely grant, and if the result showed he wasn't the father, Sarah would be safe from his custody claims. but it would also potentially destroy an innocent man's marriage and family. Sarah, you're going to have to tell David about this. He needs to know everything if he's going to represent you properly. I can't. James is a good man. He was going through problems with his wife, and we were both vulnerable, but they worked things out. He has 2 little girls. I can't be the reason his family falls apart. Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the city, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. After several minutes, he turned back to Sarah. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to fight Tony's petition on the grounds that he abandoned you during the pregnancy. Second, we're going to document your current living situation and support system to counter his claims about instability. Third, we're going to prepare for the possibility of a paternity test by having David research how to handle it discreetly. And if the test shows Tony isn't the father, then we deal with that when it happens. But Sarah, you need to understand something. Even if James is Hope's biological father, that doesn't automatically give him parental rights. He'd have to assert those rights, and given his situation, that's unlikely. Sarah nodded, but Marcus could see the fear still etched in every line of her face. What if I lose her? What if the court decides I'm unfit? Marcus sat back down beside her and took her hands again. That's not going to happen. You're not the desperate woman I found on that bridge anymore. You're healthy, you're stable, you have support, and you have the best legal representation money can buy. Most importantly, you have love to give this baby, the one thing Tony can't fake or buy. As if responding to her mother's emotional state, Hope kicked strongly, making Sarah gasp and laugh despite her tears. Marcus watched the movement with wonder, still amazed by the miracle of life growing so close to where they sat. "She's strong," he said softly, "just like her mother." Sarah placed her hand over the spot where Hope had kicked and took a deep breath. "I won't let him take her. I don't care what I have to do or what I have to face." He gave up his right to be her father when he walked out. "That's the spirit we need for this fight," Marcus said, standing up and straightening his tie. "I'm cancelling my morning meetings. We're going to see David today, and we're going to start building a case that shows exactly what kind of mother Hope is going to have." As Marcus reached for his phone to make the call, Sarah looked down at the legal papers scattered on the kitchen table. For 3 weeks, she'd allowed herself to believe that her problems were behind her, that Hope would be born into safety and love. Now she realized that the hardest battle was just beginning, but this time she wouldn't face it alone. The hospital bracelet was pink plastic with black lettering. Miller, Sarah E. Dobb, 06-15-2000, attending Dr. Patricia Reyes. Sarah stared at it through the fog of exhaustion and medication, trying to piece together how she'd gotten from Marcus's kitchen to Northwestern Memorial's maternity ward. The last clear memory she had was sitting in David Stern's law office, listening to him explain the various ways Tony's legal petition could play out when the cramping had started. Preterm labor, the nurse had called it. Though at 26 weeks, Hope was still too early to survive outside the womb. The contractions had been regular and strong enough to require immediate intervention, IV medications to stop the labor, steroids to help develop Hope's lungs in case the medications failed, and complete bed rest until further notice. Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed, still wearing the same suit from that morning, though it was now rumpled and showing the stress of the day. His phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from his office, but he'd ignored every one, his attention focused entirely on the monitors, tracking Sarah's contractions and Hope's heartbeat. "How long have I been here?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from the oxygen mask they'd had her wearing earlier. 6 hours. It's almost midnight." Marcus leaned forward, relief evident on his face now that she was fully conscious. "You scared the hell out of me, Sarah. The baby... Hope's fine. Strong heartbeat, good movement. The contractions have stopped, and Dr. Reyes says you can probably go home in a couple of days if you stay stable." Marcus reached over and gently adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "But she wants you on strict bed rest for at least 2 weeks." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment. It was the stress, wasn't it, from Tony's lawsuit. Dr. Reyes said stress can definitely trigger preterm labor, especially in someone who's already been through trauma. Marcus's voice grew angry. That bastard's legal games almost cost Hope her life. Has there been any word from David about the case? Marcus hesitated, and Sarah knew immediately that there was news she wouldn't want to hear. Tell me. Tony filed an emergency motion with the court. He's claiming that your hospitalization proves you're unfit to carry the pregnancy safely, and he wants the court to appoint a guardian ad litem immediately. Marcus's jaw tightened. He's also requesting that you be required to submit to supervised medical care and that your living situation be evaluated by social services. Sarah felt her heart rate spike, and immediately the monitors in the room began beeping faster. Marcus noticed and quickly took her hand, his voice becoming soothing. Hey, breathe. Deep breaths. Don't let him win by making yourself sick again. A nurse appeared in the doorway, drawn by the monitor alarms. She checked Sarah's vital signs and adjusted something on one of the machines before giving Marcus a pointed look. She needs to stay calm, the nurse said. No stressful conversations until Dr. Reyes clears it. After the nurse left, Marcus and Sarah sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm not fit to be Hope's mother. I almost killed us both on that bridge, and now I've put her at risk again. Stop! Marcus's voice was firm but gentle. Sarah, look at me. She turned her head to meet his eyes and saw the same determination there that had convinced her to step back from the bridge's edge. You are not responsible for Tony's cruelty. You are not responsible for the stress he's putting you under with his lawsuit, and you are absolutely not unfit to be Hope's mother. Marcus leaned closer to her bed. Do you know what you did when the contractions started getting bad in David's office? You didn't panic. You didn't fall apart. You calmly asked David to call 911, and then you spent the entire ambulance ride talking to Hope, telling her it wasn't time yet, asking her to stay strong and stay put. Sarah had only vague memories of the ambulance ride, but she remembered the sound of her own voice, steady despite the pain, focused entirely on her daughter's well-being. The paramedic told me he'd never seen a mother handle preterm labor so calmly, Marcus continued. He said you were more concerned about the baby than about yourself, even when the pain was obviously excruciating. I was terrified. Of course you were, but you didn't let terror control you. You let love control you instead. That's what makes someone fit to be a parent, Sarah. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to put your child's needs before your own fear. A soft knock on the door interrupted them, and David Stern entered carrying a briefcase and looking like he'd been awake for 24 hours straight. At 58, David was one of Chicago's most respected family law attorneys, with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that made judges listen when he spoke. How are you feeling, Sarah? David asked, pulling up another chair. Like I've been hit by a truck. But Marcus says Hope is okay, so I'm okay. David nodded and opened his briefcase, pulling out several folders. I've been working on our response to Tony's motions, and I have some good news and some challenging news. Give me the challenging news first, Sarah said. The court is going to appoint a guardian ad litem, someone to represent Hope's interests independently from both parents. That's actually standard in contested custody cases involving unborn children. But Tony's motion made it sound like an emergency measure. David flipped through one of the folders. The gal will interview both of you, assess your living situations, and make recommendations to the court about custody and visitation. Sarah felt her chest tighten, but Marcus squeezed her hand reassuringly. However, David continued, the good news is that I've been able to document Tony's abandonment of you during the pregnancy extensively. His landlord confirmed that he moved out the day after you told him about the pregnancy. His employer confirmed that he requested an immediate transfer to their Seattle office. And I found 3 witnesses who heard him say at a bar that he was done with baby mama drama. He actually said that? Sarah asked, anger momentarily overriding her exhaustion. According to 2 bartenders and a regular customer, yes. All 3 are willing to testify. David made a note in his folder. But Sarah, I need to ask you again about the paternity question. If there's any doubt about whether Tony is the father, we need to address it proactively. Sarah looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly, then back at David. There's a possibility, small but real, that someone else might be the father. David's expression didn't change, but he leaned forward slightly. How small? I was with someone else during a brief breakup with Tony, about 7 weeks before I got pregnant. The timing makes it possible, but unlikely. Does Tony know about this other relationship? No. And the other man, he's married now, has children. I can't destroy his family. David was quiet for a moment, then closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. Here's the situation. Tony is almost certainly going to demand a paternity test, especially if he finds out about the other relationship. If the test proves he's not the father, his custody case disappears. But it also means we need to be prepared for the possibility that the biological father might have parental rights. What if the biological father doesn't want those rights? Marcus asked. Then Sarah would have sole custody, assuming she can prove she's a fit parent. David looked directly at Sarah. But if Tony isn't the father, and the real father doesn't? Step up. Tony could try to argue that the baby needs a stable male figure and volunteer himself as an adoptive parent. Sarah felt the room spin slightly. He could still take her, even if she's not his biological child. It's complicated, but theoretically possible if he could convince a judge that it's in the child's best interests. David opened another folder. However, we have one major advantage that Tony doesn't know about yet. What's that? Marcus asked. David smiled for the first time since entering the room. Marcus, you've been providing Sarah with housing, medical care, and emotional support throughout this pregnancy. You've demonstrated a stable, committed relationship with both mother and child. If you were willing to formally petition the court for custodial rights as a de facto stepfather, it would significantly strengthen Sarah's position. The room fell silent as the implications of David's suggestions sank in. Marcus looked at Sarah, who was staring at him with a mixture of hope and fear. What exactly would that mean? Marcus asked quietly. It would mean legally acknowledging that you intend to help raise this child, regardless of biological paternity. It would mean asking the court to recognize your role in Hope's life as legitimate and protective. David paused. It would also mean that if anything happened to Sarah, you would have legal standing to seek custody rather than letting Hope go into the system or to Tony. Sarah felt Hope kick, a strong movement that seemed to punctuate the conversation. She looked at Marcus, this man who'd saved her life, who'd opened his home to her, who'd already given Hope more love and stability than her biological father ever had. Marcus, you don't have to, she began. Yes, Marcus said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. Yes, I'll do it. Hope deserves to have someone fighting for her who actually wants her in their life. David nodded and made a note in his folder. Then we have a fight on our hands, but it's a fight we can win. As the lawyer packed up his papers and prepared to leave, Sarah realized that the cramping and contractions had completely stopped. For the first time in hours, her body felt calm, as if Hope had been listening to the conversation and had decided it was safe to stay put a little longer. Marcus noticed the change in the monitors. How do you feel? Better? Stronger? Sarah managed a small smile. Hope likes you, I think. She always settles down when you're around. Marcus placed his hand gently on Sarah's belly and immediately felt a small flutter of movement, Hope responding to his touch. I like her too, he said softly. And I'm going to make sure she gets to grow up knowing she's wanted. The DNA test results arrived on a Thursday afternoon in February, delivered in a plain manila envelope that seemed too ordinary to contain information that would change 3 lives forever. Sarah had been home from the hospital for 2 weeks, following doctor's orders for bed rest, while Hope continued to develop safely at 28 weeks. The cramping had stopped completely, and Dr. Reyes was cautiously optimistic that Sarah could carry to full term if she avoided stress. That last part had proved nearly impossible. Tony had been relentless in his legal campaign, filing motion after motion, each one designed to paint Sarah as unstable and unfit. He'd hired investigators to dig into her past, had the Guardian ad litem conduct multiple interviews, and had even shown up at Marcus's house twice trying to serve additional papers. Each encounter had left Sarah shaking, and Marcus had finally hired private security to keep Tony away from the property. Now, holding the envelope that contained the paternity test results, Sarah felt her hands trembling for an entirely different reason. Marcus sat beside her on the couch in the living room, his own expression tense as they both stared at the unopened envelope. "Whatever it says, we'll deal with it," Marcus said quietly. "Together." Sarah nodded and carefully tore open the seal, pulling out the official laboratory report. The technical language was dense, but the conclusion was printed in bold letters at the bottom of the page. Based on the genetic analysis of the samples provided, Anthony James Morrison is excluded as the biological father of the child. The probability of paternity is 0%. Sarah stared at the words for a long moment, then read them again to make sure she'd understood correctly. The paper fluttered from her fingers as she sank back against the couch cushions. "He's not the father," she whispered. "Tony isn't Hope's father." Marcus picked up the paper and read the results himself, his expression moving from tension to relief to something that looked like concern. "This changes everything. His custody case disappears, right? He can't claim parental rights if he's not actually the parent." "That's right. But Sarah—" Marcus set the paper aside and turned to face her fully. "This means James Rodriguez is Hope's biological father." The name hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. For weeks, Sarah had been telling herself that the chances were slim, that Tony was probably Hope's father, despite the timing of her brief relationship with James. She'd almost convinced herself that the paternity question was just a legal formality that would confirm what she already knew. Now she was forced to confront the reality she'd been avoiding. Hope belonged to a man who didn't know she existed, a man who was married with children of his own, a man whose life would be destroyed if the truth came out. "What am I going to do?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Before Marcus could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed David Stern's office. "I should take this," Marcus said, answering the call. "David, we just got the results. Yes, you were right. Tony's not the father." He paused, listening. "What do you mean he already knows?" Sarah watched Marcus's face grow pale as he listened to whatever David was telling him. After several minutes of mostly one-sided conversation, Marcus ended the call and turned to Sarah with an expression she'd never seen before, a mixture of anger, concern, and something that looked like fear. "Tony got a copy of the results an hour ago," Marcus said slowly. "He's already filed paperwork to withdraw his custody petition. That's good, right?" "It would be, except he's also filed something else. He's demanding that the court identify and locate the biological father, claiming that the child has a right to know her real parent and that he has a right to pursue child support from the actual father." Sarah felt the room start to spin. "He's going after James. It gets worse. Tony hired a private investigator weeks ago to dig into your background. They found evidence of your relationship with James, photos of you together, credit card records showing he paid for dinner, hotel records." Marcus's voice was grim. "Tony knows exactly who the biological father is, and he's threatening to expose everything unless you agree to pay him $50,000 to keep quiet." "Extortion," Sarah breathed. "Blackmail, technically, but yes. He's threatening to destroy James's marriage and family unless you pay him to disappear." Sarah struggled to her feet, pacing the living room despite the doctor's orders to remain sedentary. Hope seemed to sense her mother's agitation, kicking and moving restlessly. "I don't have $50,000, Sarah said. "Even with everything, You've done for me. I don't have that kind of money. I do, Marcus said quietly. Sarah stopped pacing and stared at him. No, absolutely not. You've already done too much, and I can't let you... Sarah, listen to me. This isn't about the money. I'd pay 10 times that amount to keep you and Hope safe, but paying Tony won't solve the problem. It'll just delay it. Blackmailers always come back for more. Then what do we do? I can't let James's family be destroyed because of my mistakes. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, his business mind working through the possibilities and consequences. Finally, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. David, it's Marcus. Again, I need you to set up a meeting, discreet, off the record. I want to talk to James Rodriguez before Tony can get to him. Sarah's heart stopped. Marcus, no. You can't drag him into this. Marcus held up a hand, continuing his conversation with David. I don't care what it costs or how you arrange it. James Rodriguez needs to know what's happening before he gets blindsided by Tony's investigators or a court summons. After ending the call, Marcus turned back to Sarah. He has a right to know, and more importantly, he has a right to make his own decision about how to handle this situation before Tony forces the issue. What if he wants custody? What if he wants to take Hope away from me? Then we deal with that. But Sarah, you're thinking about this wrong. From what you've told me about James, he's a good man who made a mistake during a difficult time in his marriage. Good men don't try to destroy the lives of women they've cared about. Sarah sank back onto the couch, her hands automatically moving to her belly where Hope was still moving restlessly. This is all my fault. If I hadn't been so stupid, if I hadn't gotten involved with James when Tony and I were broken up... Stop! Marcus's voice was firm. You were hurt and lonely, and you found comfort with someone who was kind to you. That doesn't make you stupid or selfish. It makes you human. But James's children, his wife, they're going to hate me. You don't know that. And even if that happens, it's not your responsibility to protect James from the consequences of his choices. It's your responsibility to protect Hope. And right now, the best way to do that is to get ahead of Tony's blackmail scheme. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made her blood run cold. Clock's ticking, Sarah. 48 hours to decide. 50 grand or I tell Mr. Rodriguez's wife everything. Your choice. Marcus read the message over her shoulder, and his jaw tightened. That settles it. David's setting up a meeting with James for tomorrow morning. We're going to tell him the truth and let him decide how he wants to handle it. What if he doesn't believe me? What if he thinks I'm trying to trap him somehow? Then we'll deal with that too. But Sarah, hiding from this isn't going to make it go away. Tony's going to keep escalating until he gets what he wants, and what he wants is to hurt you as badly as possible. As if summoned by their conversation, the doorbell rang. Marcus looked through the window and cursed under his breath. It's Tony, he said. Stay here, don't let him see you. Marcus opened the front door, but didn't invite Tony inside. From the living room, Sarah could hear their conversation clearly. Well, Tony's voice carried his usual arrogant tone. I guess you got the DNA results too. Must be quite a shock finding out your little charity case was lying to you about who the baby daddy is. What do you want, Tony? I want what's fair. Sarah cost me months of legal fees, emotional distress, public embarrassment. The least she can do is help me recoup my losses. You mean the legal fees you spent trying to take a baby away from the woman you abandoned? The emotional distress of having your extortion scheme exposed? That kind of fairness? Tony's laugh was cold. You can spin it however you want, but the facts are the facts. Sarah was sleeping around while we were together, got pregnant by some other guy, and tried to pass the kid off as mine. That's fraud, Marcus. I could have her arrested. For what exactly? You broke up. She was free to see other people. She was also free to tell me the truth when we got back together. Instead, she let me believe the baby was mine until it became convenient to admit otherwise. Sarah heard Marcus's voice drop to a tone she'd never heard before. Dangerous and controlled. Get off my property, Tony. Don't come back here again. 48 hours, Tony called out as Marcus closed the door. And if I don't hear from Sarah, James Rodriguez is going to get a very interesting phone call. Marcus returned to the living room to find Sarah crying, not the gentle tears of relief or sadness, but the hard sobs of someone whose worst fears were being realized. "He's right," Sarah said through her tears. "I did lie, maybe not intentionally, but I let Tony believe hope was his when I wasn't sure." Marcus sat beside her and pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her protectively. "Sarah, you were scared and alone. You made the best decisions you could with the information you had. That's not fraud, that's survival. But what about James? What about his family?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but determined. "James is going to find out eventually, either from us, in a controlled way that gives him options, or from Tony, in a way designed to cause maximum damage. Which would you prefer?" Sarah leaned into Marcus's embrace, feeling hope settle as her mother's stress began to calm. Tomorrow, she would have to face the man whose life she was about to change forever. Tonight, she would hold on to the one person who'd promised to stand by her no matter what the paternity test revealed. "Will you come with me?" Sarah asked quietly. "When I tell James?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Marcus replied, and for the first time since opening that envelope, Sarah felt like maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through this that didn't destroy everyone she cared about. The coffee shop David had chosen for the meeting was tucked away in a quiet corner of Lincoln Park, the kind of place where neighbors met for casual conversations rather than life-altering revelations. James Rodriguez arrived exactly on time, looking like what he was, a dedicated elementary school teacher in his early 30s, wearing a simple button-down shirt and jeans, his dark hair showing the first hints of grey at the temples. Sarah recognized him immediately, though he looked older than she remembered, more settled. The brief intensity of their relationship 6 months ago felt like a lifetime past, but seeing him brought back memories of kindness during one of the darkest periods of her life. Marcus had insisted on arriving first, positioning himself where he could see both entrances and maintain visual contact with their security detail. Tony's threatening behavior had escalated since the DNA results, and Marcus wasn't taking any chances with Sarah's safety. "That's him," Sarah said quietly as James approached their corner table, his expression uncertain and clearly confused about why he'd been asked to meet with strangers about a matter of mutual concern. James sat down cautiously, his eyes moving between Sarah, whom he obviously recognized, and Marcus, whose expensive suit and commanding presence clearly made him uneasy. "Sarah," James said carefully, "I have to admit, I'm surprised to hear. And from you, your friend said there was something important we needed to discuss." Sarah's hands shook as she reached into her purse and pulled out the DNA test results, the ultrasound photo, and Tony's threatening text messages. She placed them on the table between them like evidence in a trial. "James, I need to tell you something that's going to change your life," she said, her voice barely steady. "I'm 30 weeks pregnant. The baby, her name is Hope. She's yours." The color drained from James's face as he stared at the papers in front of him. He picked up the ultrasound photo first, studying the grainy image with the same wonder Marcus had shown weeks ago. "Mine?" James whispered. "The DNA test confirms it. I hoped that my ex-boyfriend Tony was the father, but the test proved otherwise." Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Tony's been trying to get custody, but when he found out he wasn't the biological father, he started blackmailing me. He's threatening to tell your wife about us unless I pay him $50,000. James set down the ultrasound photo and looked directly at Sarah, his expression moving through shock, confusion, and growing anger. "He's threatening to tell Maria? I'm so sorry, James. I never wanted you to find out this way. I never wanted to disrupt your life or hurt your family." Marcus, who had been silent during Sarah's explanation, leaned forward slightly. "We brought you here because we thought you had a right to know before Tony forces the issue. He's given Sarah 48 hours to pay, and if she doesn't, He'll call Maria himself. James finished, his voice hollow with realization. The three of them sat in silence for several minutes, each processing the enormity of the situation. Finally, James spoke again, his voice steady but strained. "Tell me about the pregnancy. Have you been getting proper care? Is the baby healthy?" Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for his first concern being Hope's well-being rather than the complications this would create for him. "She's healthy. I had some preterm labor scares, but she's doing well now, due in 6 weeks. And you, how are you doing? I remember you were going through a difficult time when we knew each other." "She was homeless and suicidal when I found her," Marcus said bluntly, causing both Sarah and James to look at him in surprise. "Tony abandoned her when she told him about the pregnancy. She was living in her car and had lost her job. She was standing on the Michigan Avenue Bridge, ready to jump, when I talked her down." James's face went pale. "Sarah, my God, I'm okay." "Now," Sarah said quickly, "Marcus has been helping me, giving me a place to live, making sure Hope and I get proper medical care. But this situation with Tony, I can't let him destroy your marriage to protect myself." James was quiet for a long time, staring at the ultrasound photo. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Maria and I have been trying to have another baby for 3 years, he said quietly. "We've been through fertility treatments, miscarriages, disappointments month after month. She's starting to think maybe God doesn't want us to have more children." Sarah felt her heart break for him, understanding now the full cruelty of the situation. "James, I'm so sorry. If I could undo this, if I could go back and make different choices—" "No," James said firmly. "Don't apologize for this baby's existence. She didn't ask to be created from a complicated situation, but she deserves to be wanted and loved, regardless of the circumstances." Marcus studied James carefully, reading the sincerity in his voice and the genuine concern in his expression. "What do you want to do about Tony's threat?" James was quiet for several more minutes, then pulled out his phone and showed them a photo. 2 little girls, maybe 8 and 10 years old, with bright smiles and their father's dark hair. "These are my daughters, Sophia and Isabella. They adore their mother, and they're finally old enough to understand that sometimes marriages go through difficult periods. Maria and I worked hard to repair our relationship after the problems we had last year." He looked directly at Sarah. "If this comes out, it will destroy everything we've rebuilt. But if I pay a blackmailer, I become complicit in his crime, and he'll just keep coming back for more." "So what do you want to do?" Marcus asked again. James was quiet for so long that Sarah began to think he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with resolve. "I want to tell Maria myself, tonight, before Tony can get to her." He looked at Sarah with something that might have been gratitude. "And I want to make sure this baby, Hope, has everything she needs, even if I can't be part of her daily life." "James, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. She's my responsibility too." James paused, then asked the question Sarah had been dreading. "Do you want me to seek custody?" Sarah's hands instinctively moved to her belly, where Hope was resting quietly, as if sensing the importance of the conversation happening around her. "Do you want custody?" "I want what's best for Hope. If you're stable and have support, if you want to be her mother, then that's what's best for her. But I want to be able to provide financial support, and I want the option to be part of her life if my family can handle it." Marcus cleared his throat, drawing both their attention. "There's something else you should know. I've petitioned the court to be legally recognized as Hope's adoptive father. If the court approves it, and if Sarah agrees, Hope would have legal protection and financial security, regardless of what happens with Tony's threats or your family situation." James looked at Marcus with new understanding. "You're willing to raise another man's child?" "I'm willing to raise the child of the woman I care about, regardless of biology," Marcus said simply. "Sarah and Hope are family to me now. That's not going to change based on DNA results." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes at Marcus's words, but also a new concern. James, if Marcus adopts Hope legally, would that affect your parental rights? Not necessarily, James said, but it would mean Hope would have two fathers who want what's best for her, which is more than a lot of kids can say. He looked at Marcus with respect. You're a good man for doing this. So are you for wanting to tell your wife the truth instead of paying a blackmailer. James nodded and began gathering the papers from the table. Can I keep the ultrasound photo? I'd like Maria to see what Hope looks like. Sarah handed him the photo, then pulled out her phone and showed him a more recent ultrasound image. This was taken last week. She's gotten so much bigger. James studied the new photo with wonder, and for a moment Sarah could see the father. He might have been under different circumstances. The thought made her sad, but also hopeful. If James could find room in his heart for Hope despite the complications, maybe there was a way for everyone to come out of this situation with their dignity intact. I should go, James said, standing up from the table. I need to figure out how to explain this to Maria before Tony calls. He paused, looking at Sarah with genuine concern. Are you sure you're ready to be a single mother? It's going to be hard even with Marcus's support. Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling Hope's gentle movements. I've been preparing for this since the moment I found out I was pregnant. I've made mistakes, but I love her. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, James said softly. Then to Marcus, take care of them, both of them. After James left, Sarah and Marcus sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the conversation and its implications. He's going to tell his wife tonight, Sarah said finally, and tomorrow Tony's leverage disappears, Marcus replied. Are you ready for that? Sarah thought about the question seriously. Tony's blackmail had been hanging over her head for days, making her feel powerless and afraid. But now, with James willing to face the truth and Marcus prepared to legally adopt Hope, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, control over her own life. I'm ready, she said, for all of it. The court hearing, Tony's reaction, becoming Hope's mother. I'm ready. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since the DNA results arrived. Then let's go home and finish preparing for the most important fight of our lives. As they left the coffee shop, Sarah felt Hope kick strongly, as if the baby approved of the decisions being made on her behalf. In 6 weeks, Hope would be born into a complicated situation, but she would also be born into love. From her mother, from the man who'd chosen to be her father, and even from her biological father, who was willing to risk his own happiness to ensure her well-being. For the first time since this all began, Sarah believed that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. The Cook County Family Court building felt like a cathedral of judgment, its high ceilings and formal wooden benches designed to remind everyone present that important decisions were made within these walls. Sarah sat between Marcus and David Stern at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded over her 32-week belly, where Hope seemed to be resting peacefully despite the tension in the room. Judge Patricia Morrison presided from the bench with the kind of commanding presence that comes from 25 years of deciding the fates of families in crisis. At 62, she was known for her fairness, her intolerance for legal games, and her unwavering focus on the best interests of children. The courtroom was surprisingly full for what should have been a routine custody hearing. Tony sat at the defendant's table with his lawyer, looking smug despite having no legal standing, since the DNA results proved he wasn't Hope's father. James Rodriguez sat in the gallery behind Sarah, having come to offer support despite the painful conversation he'd had with his wife 3 nights ago. Maria had cried, raged, and ultimately asked him to leave their home while she processed the betrayal. But she'd also agreed not to interfere with whatever arrangement he made regarding Hope. Your Honor, David began, as he stood to address the court. This case represents a textbook example of why our family court system exists, to protect the welfare of children from the manipulative actions of adults who put their own interests ahead of innocent lives. Judge Morrison nodded for him to continue, her pen poised over her legal pad. My client, Sarah Miller, is a 24-year-old woman who found herself pregnant and abandoned by the man she believed to be the father of her child. Mr. Anthony Morrison, no relation to Your Honor, left my client homeless, destitute, and suicidal. She was literally standing on the edge of the Michigan Avenue Bridge, preparing to end her life and the life of her unborn child, when Mr. Marcus Washington intervened and saved both their lives. Sarah felt hope flutter, as if responding to the mention of that terrible night that now seemed like a lifetime ago. Since that time, David continued, Mr. Washington has provided my client with housing, medical care, emotional support, and stability. He has attended every doctor's appointment, participated in birth preparation classes, and has formally petitioned this court to adopt Hope Miller as his own daughter. Tony's lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s named Jennifer Hayes, stood up. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Stern is presenting a narrative rather than legal arguments. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. Mr. Stern, please focus on the relief you're seeking from the court. David nodded. Your Honor, we're asking the court to approve Mr. Washington's petition for adoption and to grant my client sole custody of Hope Miller with Mr. Washington as the legal father. We're also asking the court to issue a protective order preventing Mr. Tony Morrison from contacting my client or interfering with her pregnancy and parenting decisions. And what is Mr. Tony Morrison's standing in this case, given the DNA results that exclude him as the biological father? Jennifer Hayes stood again. Your Honor, while my client is not the biological father, he has legitimate concerns about the welfare of this child. Ms. Miller deliberately misled him about paternity, causing him significant emotional and financial distress. Furthermore, her recent hospitalization for stress-related pregnancy complications raises questions about her fitness as a parent. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment, but Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand reassuringly. Judge Morrison looked at Tony directly. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Given that you're not this child's father, and given that you abandoned Ms. Miller when she informed you of her pregnancy, what exactly is your interest in these proceedings? Tony stood up, ignoring his lawyer's attempt to keep him seated. Your Honor, I was in a relationship with Sarah for 2 years. I had every reason to believe the baby was mine, and I made decisions based on that belief. When I found out she'd been with someone else during our relationship, I had a right to know the truth. Mr. Morrison, the judge's voice carried a warning. Tone, you're not answering my question. What is your current interest in this child's welfare? I just think she deserves better than being raised by someone who lies about paternity and lives off the charity of strangers. The courtroom fell silent at Tony's blunt statement. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but before she could react, another voice spoke from the gallery. Your Honor, may I address the court? Everyone turned to see James Rodriguez standing up, his face set with determination. And you are? Judge Morrison asked. James Rodriguez. I'm Hope's biological father. The judge raised her eyebrows. This is highly irregular, Mr. Rodriguez. Are you represented by counsel? No, Your Honor. I'm here voluntarily to support Ms. Miller's petition and to ask the court to recognize Mr. Washington's adoption request. David quickly stood. Your Honor, if Mr. Rodriguez wishes to address the court, we have no objection. His support of our petition is relevant to the child's best interests. Jennifer Hayes looked like she wanted to object, but Tony grabbed her arm and whispered something urgent in her ear. Sarah couldn't hear what he said, but she saw the lawyer's expression change to one of concern. Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Morrison, said, you may make a brief statement, but understand that anything you say here is on the record. James walked to the center of the courtroom, his hands clasped behind his back. "Your Honor, I want the court to know that Ms. Miller did not deceive anyone intentionally. When she and I had our brief relationship, we were both going through difficult times in our primary relationships. We both made mistakes, but those mistakes resulted in the creation of a child who deserves love and stability." He turned slightly to look at Sarah, then back to the judge. "I cannot be a daily presence in Hope's life due to my own family obligations, but I can tell you that Ms. Miller has shown nothing but love and dedication to this pregnancy. She nearly died trying to protect Hope when stress caused preterm labor. She has followed every medical recommendation, prepared carefully for motherhood, and has the support of a good man who wants to be Hope's father." James's voice grew stronger. "Mr. Morrison abandoned Ms. Miller when she needed him most. Mr. Washington saved her life and has been nothing but supportive since. If the court is truly concerned with Hope's best interests, the choice should be obvious." Judge Morrison made several notes, then looked up at the courtroom. "I'm going to call a brief recess to review the documents before us. When we return, I'll render my decision." As the judge left the bench, Sarah felt Hope kick strongly, as if the baby had been listening to every word and was ready to finally meet the people who'd been fighting so hard for her future. Marcus leaned over and whispered in Sarah's ear, "Almost over. We've got this." For the first time in weeks, Sarah actually believed him. When Judge Morrison returned to the bench 15 minutes later, the courtroom had settled into the kind of tense quiet that precedes life-changing announcements. Sarah felt Hope moving restlessly, as if the baby sensed the importance of the moment. Marcus sat perfectly still beside her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw was set with determination. The gavel came down with authority, and Judge Morrison's voice filled the courtroom. "In the matter of Miller versus Morrison, regarding the custody and welfare of the minor child to be known as Hope Miller, this court has reviewed all documents, testimonies, and evidence presented." She paused, looking directly at each of the key participants. "Let me begin by addressing Mr. Tony Morrison's role in these proceedings." Tony straightened in his chair, his expression hopeful despite his lack of biological connection to Hope. "Mr. Morrison, while I understand that learning about paternity issues can be emotionally difficult, your behavior throughout this process has been both legally questionable and morally reprehensible." The judge's tone was stern. "You abandoned Ms. Miller during her pregnancy, forcing her into homelessness and desperate circumstances. When DNA results excluded you as the father, rather than gracefully withdrawing, you engaged in what can only be described as harassment and attempted extortion." Tony's face went red, and his lawyer placed a restraining hand on his arm to keep him seated. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison continued, "your attempts to use this child's welfare as leverage for financial gain demonstrate a complete disregard for her best interests. This court finds that you have no standing in this matter and no legitimate interest in Hope Miller's future. Your petition is denied in its entirety, and I'm issuing a restraining order preventing you from contacting Ms. Miller or interfering with her parenting decisions." Sarah felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly made her dizzy. Beside her, Marcus exhaled for what seemed like the first time in hours, but the judge wasn't finished. "Now, regarding the primary matter before this court, Mr. Washington's petition for adoption and Ms. Miller's request for sole custody with Mr. Washington as the legal father." Judge Morrison consulted her notes before continuing. "I've rarely seen a case where the facts were so clear-cut regarding what serves a child's best interests." She looked directly at Sarah. "Ms. Miller, you have demonstrated remarkable strength and dedication throughout a pregnancy fraught with challenges. Despite being abandoned, becoming homeless, and facing significant health scares, you have consistently prioritized your daughter's welfare above your own comfort and safety." Sarah felt tears starting in her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than fear. Mr. Washington, the judge continued, turning to Marcus, your intervention on the bridge that night undoubtedly saved 2 lives. But more than that, your continued support, your commitment to this family, and your willingness to legally adopt a child who is not biologically yours demonstrates the kind of character this court likes to see in prospective parents. Marcus nodded respectfully, his hand finding Sarah's under the table. Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Morrison addressed James directly, your willingness to take responsibility for your role in this situation, while also recognizing what is truly best for Hope, shows maturity and genuine concern for her welfare. The courtroom was absolutely silent now, everyone waiting for the final decision. Therefore, this court grants Ms. Miller sole physical and legal custody of Hope Miller, effective immediately upon birth. Mr. Washington's petition for adoption is approved, contingent upon final documentation being completed within 30 days of Hope's birth. Mr. Rodriguez's parental rights are terminated by mutual consent, with provisions for financial support as agreed upon by all parties. The gavel came down with finality, and suddenly the courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. David Stern shook Marcus's hand, while Sarah found herself crying tears of pure joy and relief. But the most emotional moment came when James approached their table as people began filing out of the courtroom. "Congratulations," he said to Sarah, his voice thick with emotion. "Hope's lucky to have you as her mother." "James, I'm so sorry about Maria." He held up a hand to stop her. "Maria and I are going to be okay. It's going to take time, but we're working through it with counseling. What matters now is that Hope is going to grow up loved and wanted." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I've set up a college fund for her. It's not much now, but it'll grow over the years. And if she ever wants to know about me, about her biological father, I want her to know she was never unwanted, just complicated." Marcus stood and extended his hand to James. "Thank you for being a man of integrity in an impossible situation." James shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for being the father I couldn't be." As James walked away, Sarah watched him go with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Hope would grow up with questions about her biological father, but she would also know that he had been decent enough to put her needs before his own comfort. Tony and his lawyer had left immediately after the judge's ruling, but not before Tony shot a venomous look in Sarah's direction. David assured them that the restraining order would be enforced strictly, and that Tony's blackmail attempts had been documented thoroughly in case he tried anything else. Outside the courthouse, Sarah stood on the steps in the February sunshine, feeling hope kick strong and steady in her belly. In 6 weeks, she would hold her daughter for the first time. Hope would be born into a family that had chosen to love her, protect her, and fight for her before she even took her first breath. Marcus put his arm around Sarah's shoulders as they watched the city bustle around them, people going about their daily lives, unaware that 2 lives had just been forever changed for the better inside that courthouse. "Ready to go home?" Marcus asked. Sarah smiled, thinking of the nursery that was waiting for Hope, the rocking chair where she would sing lullabies, the man beside her who had saved her life and chosen to share it. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home and get ready to meet our daughter." The photograph sat on Marcus Washington's desk at his downtown office, a simple silver frame containing an image that had transformed his understanding of what success really meant. In the picture, Sarah held 6-month-old Hope on the steps of their Lincoln Park home, both of them laughing at something just outside the camera's view. Marcus stood behind them, his hand resting protectively on Sarah's shoulder, his face showing a contentment that 3 years of grief had almost convinced him he'd never feel again. It had been 8 months since that terrible night on the bridge, 6 months since Hope Elizabeth Washington had arrived in the world with a healthy cry that seemed to announce her readiness to take on whatever challenges life might offer. The birth had been everything Sarah had hoped for. Marcus holding her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement and promises that Hope was almost here. that their family was almost complete. Now, as Marcus wrapped up his final meeting of the day, he studied that photograph and marveled at how dramatically his life had changed. The emptiness that had consumed him after Diane's death had been replaced by something he'd never expected to experience again: purpose that extended beyond business deals and profit margins. Hope had been an easy baby, sleeping through the night. By 3 months, and greeting each morning with a smile that could melt the hardest heart. She had Sarah's eyes, but Marcus's stubborn chin, and she'd developed an obvious preference for being held by her daddy whenever she was fussy. The pediatrician had assured them this was normal, but Marcus secretly loved that Hope seemed to recognize him as her protector and provider. Sarah had transformed as completely as Marcus. The desperate, broken woman he'd found on that bridge had blossomed into a confident mother who balanced tenderness with strength. She'd completed her certification as a lactation consultant while Hope napped, turning the guest bedroom into a home office where she counseled new mothers over video calls. Her work gave her flexibility to be home with Hope, while also providing the independence and professional fulfillment she'd always craved. The nursery that had once been a shrine to loss had become a celebration of new life. Hope's crib sat where the other crib had waited empty for 3 years, but surrounded now by toys and books and all the beautiful chaos of a lived-in room. The mobile of hand-carved animals still turned above the crib, and Hope would lie there for long stretches, watching the gentle movement with fascination. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Hope's first word today. She said, "Dada," while looking right at you in that picture on the refrigerator. I cried happy tears for 10 minutes. He smiled, remembering the morning he'd left for work when Hope had reached for him from Sarah's arms, her little face scrunching with displeasure when he'd kissed them goodbye. Sarah had taken a video of Hope babbling what did sound remarkably like Dada, while pointing at the family photo they'd hung at Hope's eye level in the kitchen. The intercom on his desk crackled to life. "Mr. Washington, your 4 o'clock is here. Send him in, please." David Rodriguez entered Marcus's office carrying a folder and wearing the slightly nervous expression of someone who wasn't used to navigating the corporate world. At 34, James had the weathered look of an elementary school teacher who spent his days herding children and his evenings grading papers. But Marcus had grown to respect the man's integrity over the months since the custody hearing. "Marcus, thanks for seeing me," James said, settling into the chair across from the desk. "How are Sarah and Hope?" "Thriving." Hope said her first word today. "Dada." Marcus couldn't keep the pride out of his voice. James smiled, though Marcus caught a flicker of something that might have been wistfulness. "That's wonderful. She's lucky to have you." "We're the lucky ones. But I don't think you came here to discuss Hope's vocabulary development." James opened his folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. "Actually, I did. In a way, I wanted to give you these." He slid the papers across the desk. "It's the documentation for Hope's college fund. The account is fully funded now, and I've set up automatic contributions that will continue until she turns 18. Marcus scanned the documents, his eyebrows rising as he processed the numbers. "James, this is incredibly generous. Are you sure you can afford this?" Maria and I talked about it extensively. We decided that we want Hope to have every opportunity, and education is the best gift we can give her from a distance. James paused, then continued with obvious difficulty. "Maria asked me to tell you that she doesn't blame Sarah for what happened. She understands that people make complicated decisions when they're hurting. How are things at home?" "Better. We're still in counseling, but we're working through it. The girls ask about Hope sometimes. They know they have a half-sister, though. They don't understand all the details yet. When they're older, if Hope wants to meet them, we'd be open to that." Marcus nodded, understanding the delicate balance James was trying to maintain. "She'll have questions eventually. When she does, we'll make sure she knows you were a good man in an impossible situation. I appreciate that." James gathered his folder and stood to leave. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" Of course. Do you ever think about that night on the bridge, about what would have happened if you hadn't been driving by at exactly the right moment? Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering the question. I think about it all the time, but not with regret or fear, with gratitude. I think Diane would have wanted me to save them. I think she would have loved seeing Hope grow up in the nursery we prepared. You believe that? I have to. Otherwise, the pain of losing them would have been meaningless. But if their death somehow prepared me to save Sarah and Hope, then maybe there's a purpose to all of it that I couldn't see when I was drowning in grief. James shook Marcus's hand at the door. You're a good man, Marcus. Hope's going to grow up knowing what it means to be loved unconditionally. After James left, Marcus gathered his things and prepared to head home to his family. The word still felt new on his tongue, family. For 3 years, he'd been alone despite being surrounded by employees, business associates, and acquaintances. Now he had people waiting for him who genuinely cared whether he made it home safely, who missed him when he was gone, who needed him for reasons that had nothing to do with money or business connections. The drive home took him past the Michigan Avenue Bridge, where he'd first seen Sarah. He drove this route deliberately now, a daily reminder of how quickly life could change, how one moment of choosing compassion over indifference could alter the trajectory of multiple lives forever. Home, he found Sarah in the living room, Hope on her lap, reading from a picture book about brave little ducks who learned to swim. Hope looked up when Marcus entered, her face breaking into the kind of pure, uncomplicated joy that only babies can manage. She reached for him with chubby arms, babbling excitedly. "Da-da!" she said clearly, and both Sarah and Marcus froze in amazement. "Did she just—" Marcus began. "Her second word of the day," Sarah said, beaming. "I think she was saving it for when you got home." Marcus scooped Hope into his arms, feeling her tiny hands pat his cheeks as she chattered at him in her private baby language. Looking at Sarah, who was watching them with the kind of contentment he'd only dreamed of finding again, Marcus realized that this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of loss, but the presence of love strong enough to build something. "Beautiful from the broken pieces? How was your day?" Sarah asked, settling beside them on the couch. "Good." James stopped by with the college fund paperwork. But nothing as exciting as Hope's vocabulary explosion. Sarah laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. "Wait until she starts walking, then we're really in trouble." That night, after Hope had been fed and bathed and sung to sleep in the nursery that was no longer empty, Marcus and Sarah sat on the porch, watching the city lights twinkle like fallen stars. Sarah leaned against Marcus's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, still amazed that he was allowed this happiness after losing so much. "Do you think she'll remember any of this?" Sarah asked quietly. "The legal battles, the uncertainty, the way we all came together. She'll remember what matters, that she was wanted, that people fought for her, that she was born into love." Marcus pressed a kiss to the top of Sarah's head. "The rest is just details." Inside the house, Hope slept peacefully in her crib, surrounded by the love of people who had chosen to be her family. Above her, the mobile of carved animals turned slowly in the gentle air from the heating vent, casting dancing shadows on the walls, like promises of all the adventures yet to come. On the nightstand beside the crib sat a new addition, a family. A photo taken just that afternoon, showing Marcus, Sarah, and Hope on the front steps of the house that had become a home. In the picture, they were all laughing at something the photographer had said, their faces bright with the kind of happiness that comes from surviving the worst and discovering that what comes after can be more beautiful than anything you'd originally planned. It was the face of a family that had been born from loss, built from hope, and strengthened by the radical decision to love without conditions. And in the morning, they would wake up together and continue writing the story of what comes. After the ending you thought would destroy you, the story of how love finds a way even when it seems impossible.